So, Neil, for the fourth time, which now makes you the leading guest on Mark and Me, welcome back to the Mark and Me podcast.
Thanks, man. It's an honor.
I can't believe this is the fourth time, and it's been a couple of years since we last spoke. But what I really wanted to delve deep into today was Gran Turismo. I've just been lucky enough to watch it this week, and I kind of want to know how it all came about that it landed in your hands. Was there a certain talk that you'd had or a project that you've been thinking about for a long time? Or how did it kind of come to that discussion where you took it on?
Well, yeah, it was very unusual. I mean, when I was shooting it, I kept saying to the crew that I couldn't believe I was shooting a sports drama because I never imagined that to be in my future. But what happened was I had written this much darker science fiction film that I sold to Columbia, and I think the short story is basically they wanted a massive actor in the lead because it's unknown IP and it's relatively expensive. And I spent a long time, I spent months waiting for this one actor to say yes or no, and it got so irritating and tedious that I was going to go and just work on a different film and leave essentially. Now I think I'm shooting that dark sci-fi piece that I wrote next year, which I'm pretty
Well,
excited
that's
about.
exciting. That's a bit
Yeah,
of
it's pretty
a bit
it's
of an
pretty awesome.
exclusive there.
Yeah. But so in the process of me going like this actor is taking too long and this is incredibly irritating and I'm going to go do something different. They said like, "Hey, why don't you check out Gran Turismo because we are on the verge of shooting this." And I was like, that doesn't even make any sense. Like it's a racing simulator. You can't make I'm like, I don't know what that story would look like. And so I read the script that they had and a bunch of things became clear to me. Like one, uh, I didn't know that it was based on a true story. I didn't even know there was a story. I had no idea about GT Academy. I didn't know about Jan Mardenborough. I didn't know any of this stuff. And the second thing is, I am obsessed with cars. I love cars. Like it's sort of a side interest next to filmmaking. And I've actually personally owned three of the GTRs that are the cars that the kids train in GT Academy. So I was reading the script about this other passion that I have, and and I was struck by how interesting of a way into a video game film it was to not be inside the narrative of the video game, but to make the movie entirely about the game, but still be in the real world that we live in. We're not in the
Yeah.
narrative of this particular game, and I thought that was a very unique way into making a game movie. Um, but really, the primary thing was that I realized that the film left me with a feeling of movies that were usually sports dramas that I'd seen as a kid or as a teenager that had always left me with a feeling of sort of inspiration, right? Or a very positive aspirational feeling about them.
Yeah.
And it's not exactly the same as movies that inspired me to want to get into filmmaking. But it's a feeling of leaving the movie theater feeling lifted and feeling
Yeah.
sort of inspired. And it dawned on me that like there was no plan in future for me to ever do anything like that. And I kind of all of a sudden I was like, I would love to make a film that moved some 13-year-old the way that I felt when I watched, something like Rocky or whatever the film may have been. And it really had an effect on me. It was like I want to actually direct this and I want to try to direct it in a way that is as emotionally uplifting as I can do. And the way into it, besides it being a game movie, which I thought was interesting, was the cause. It was like this whole world of cars that I live inside of outside of filmmaking that just I thought that would be really, really fun. So that's basically what happened. It was a very strange, unusual set of circumstances, and um, it's kind of how the film came to be.
I kind of found it really fascinating then when you talked about that feeling you got when you were in the cinema as a kid and you
Yeah,
watched something like Rocky. I wasn't there obviously in
yeah,
the
yeah,
70s when Rocky came out, but my dad would often watch it on DVD or VHS at home, and I'd get that feeling of wanting to punch the air, after watching the film. Like anyone can,
yeah,
like the underdog can always win,
yeah.
if you put your mind to it. And it sounds crazy, but I text my friend and I said, "Have you seen Gran Turismo yet?" He's like, "No, not yet." And I'm like, it felt like the Karate Kid. but in
Yeah.
cars,
Karate
and
Kid was another reference, actually. It was
yeah,
absolutely a very similar structure, and goal, I think.
definitely with the leadership. And if you look at Dave's character, I think you can kind of look at him as like a Mr. Miyagi that kind of gets won over and then
Mm.
sees his past glory. But I just, when I've seen people talk about Gran Turismo, a lot of people say Neill Blomkamp's doing it. Like, are you what? This is crazy. But didn't that feel like a challenge to kind of show that you can not just do sci-fi or you can do horror? You can step into that kind of family entertainment and feel good film, but also deliver a story that is so passionate to you that you get to play with those cars.
Yeah, I mean, definitely there are definitely directors out there that will do projects maybe that they're not passionate about, but I don't think I would be able to.
No.
I just yeah, I don't think I don't think I would be able to like turn up on set. So I think the Venn diagram is something that I'm very passionate about. And usually that overlaps with, I mean, I want to work in fantasy. I really want to work in fantasy. I haven't done that yet, but like fantasy, horror, obviously science fiction. And it also it doesn't necessarily mean that there are things in that possible list of possibilities that are outside of what audiences may not expect from me. So it's like if the Venn diagram is I'm passionate about it and it's a topic that seems out of left field, it's I'm still passionate about it.
Yeah.
So uh, but the other way to look at it, I think people that are not creative people, that are they view choices like this in a much more cold and cynical kind of light. So they're like, like they struggle to find a reason for why I would direct it,
That's
and I think
fair.
it's when you're creative and when you're really someone who loves creating things and is artistic. I think you understand more on some level that it's like the person is probably drawn to some element of it very deeply. I mean, you're not going to commit like in this case 14 years or 14 years 14 months of hard work for something that you're not totally invested in. Like, why would you do that? So so yeah, I think I would say I'm equally passionate about it as the other films that I've done, and it to me as someone, if I watch the film when I was completing it, it feels like to me it hits the bullseye of what it was trying to do, which is basically this uplifting feeling, and the themes and the ideas behind it always felt more universal to me than either just video games or just car racing. It was more of a universal, if you believe in yourself and people don't believe in you, just stick to it, and maybe in the end you can actually push through. And that I just like that. And but it really does come down to this thing where my a lot of my own view of humanity or of the globe is kind of pessimistic. Like I think the way that I sort of operate, I guess this is like a psychiatrist couch kind of point of view, but
Counseling
it's
session. Here we go.
yeah, it seems to be that like on a personal level, I like the idea of humans being warm and being compassionate. And there's probably some humanity inside the characters that I'm interested in on an individual basis. And then as far as like humanity as a whole goes, it becomes ever more negative and pessimistic. Um, and that's typically like how I see the world and how I kind of, have directed stuff in the past. So it's just an interesting thing that I was suddenly aware of, that it's like, well, why not try to make something that is outwardly positive? And the world, I actually believe the world needs more of that. Like I genuinely believe it. So, it fit, like it was like a hand in glove kind of situation that just felt at that time like perfectly creatively suited to me.
There does seem a big absence at the moment, and I know I'm a bit of an 80s kid that's stuck in my ways, but there doesn't seem to be the feel good films as much as there used to be. And if you look at someone, and it's not in comparison to the sort
Yeah.
of budget, but a John Hughes film, you put that on
Yeah.
a Sunday,
No,
you
for
will
sure.
automatically feel better about life. If you have
No, I
a
mean,
bad week,
absolutely. I couldn't agree more. But I think I must make it clear that I'm not. I never really come from the point of view of mandating what I think society should do or what I think other people should do, right? Like I'm
yeah,
incredibly individualistic and I have a very sort of individualistic point of view of how I think people should lead their lives. and that spills over into, I'm not dictating that I think society needs more films like this. I think I needed to direct a film
Yeah.
that had these ingredients in it. But I think if you analyze where society is at, like if you look at Western culture, we are in this kind of deconstructionist sort of postmodern era, right? So when you reference films like The Karate Kid, a lot of the movies that you're talking about, the John Hughes films or Rocky, they tend to, they're unironic. They are exactly what they are portraying themselves to be. They're
Yeah.
genuinely uplifting, right? Which is exactly what Gran Turismo is. And in this kind of deconstructionist phase that we're in now, we're sort of postmodernizing and sort of reimagining things in a deconstructionist sort of way. And a lot that can be negative. It can be pessimistic. I mean, I happen to also like it, but it overall, as a society, as a feeling, it feels we're not necessarily think the future is not as bright, I don't think, as it once was. And I mean, there's a, you enter into like geopolitical slash philosophical discussions when you go down that road about like why is that the case.
Yeah.
But I do think that it is the case. So making very clearly a non-ironic, straightforward, borderline 1980s feel-good film was 100% the goal.
Was there a certain element when you were given the, obviously you said at the moment that we started recording today, you didn't know the story of Gran Turismo, you didn't know that it was this academy?
I knew the game. Yeah,
Yeah.
all I knew was well, I mean, game is a weird word for Gran Turismo, but I knew the racing simulator,
Yeah.
and that was all I knew, and I knew it fairly well because of my love of cars. But for some reason, I just didn't know that this whole academy ever existed.
So were you the guy that had it on the PlayStation back in the day? Were you a gamer that played this game, or was it all
No,
new to you?
no, it was neither of those. My brother is as into cars as I am, and he has always been into games like Gran
Yeah.
Turismo. So I've always experienced it like sort of on the peripheral edges. Like for me, like if I play games, it's PC only. I've never really been into consoles. I
No.
mean, as a kid in South Africa, I was into consoles if I was playing games like, I mean, the main one really was Mortal Kombat um on a lot of the Sega systems, but as an adult, it's like I just don't use consoles ever. It just doesn't. It's not in my vicinity. So I don't really have experience playing Gran Turismo religiously, but I have had a lot of exposure to it.
So I suppose when you were told about this project and then you said you invested so many months in it, to storyboard this and get an idea of how you're going to tell the story, because for me it was thrilling the whole way through. I was on the edge
Good.
of my seat, and I'm not just saying this because you're here today. I couldn't even imagine how hard the editing was, because it seemed
Mm,
like 100 miles per hour, 200 miles per hour the whole way through. And
yeah.
the amount of different shots in that editing that you've done, it blows my mind. It surely is the busiest film you've ever done.
Yeah. Yeah, that is definitely true. And it was part of the architecture of how the film was set up in the beginning. We had four editors and we had two primary editors, who I literally cannot say enough good things about. Um, like I just love them. I really, really
Yeah.
love them. And the third editor was an editor who had never worked in films before. I'm not even sure if he's done anything narrative like TV or anything like that, but his thing is car commercials. So he really comes out of like extremely aggressive Porsche and Mercedes-Benz commercials of just, pure cinema, like pure adrenaline cutting. Like that's it. Like there's no story. There's just like it's just sound and image. And even our two primary narrative editors were very good at that as well, but they were following story more. And yeah, it was like assembling the right editorial team, assembling the right camera department that could not just camera department, but like director of photography and camera.
Yeah.
So this idea of prioritizing quantity of footage and treating the races almost like real events that we were documenting rather than a synthetic, conforming reality to what the camera wants approach. And then the third thing was to push for this idea of kind of disassembling the cars and getting into the mechanics of the cars and into
Yeah.
the mechanics of the transmissions and the engines and stuff, and sort of remixing all of that. And then it still took like a ton of editing. I was living in LA for 7 months with those editors, like doing that stuff, and it was a long time.
You can see it's paid off though. Like the word is adrenaline. That's what I felt throughout this whole film. And to see those scenes of the lead actor obviously going in and out of the car in his bedroom, but then becomes this world and the car takes over him. Those
Mm,
visuals were flawless. Like that looked incredible, and it took me back to being a kid and my mate having one of those steering wheels and me being jealous because my parents couldn't afford one on my PS1 or whatever it was. But the way you created that kind of virtual car that he was in, that he was going in and out to create that kind of mindset of being in that world, that was astonishing, dude. That looked unbelievable.
cool. I'm glad you feel that way. I mean, for me, the stuff that I love was uh the FPV drone photography
Yeah,
on the real racetracks. Um, that was cool, and it gives it the thing that it helps with, besides being cinematically interesting, it also really helps with positioning and understanding where the cars are in terms of the race. I mean,
yeah.
if I wasn't making a video game film, I probably wouldn't have been able to steal this idea of like holographically projecting the number of his car in the crowd, so you can sort of always follow where Yun is. But the drones allow for a it allows the audience to place themselves and be very clear about where he is and what he is doing, and then you can follow it in a way that is either from a motorsports perspective or almost from like a character perspective, and you always know where he is. So that, to me, that's the stuff that I look at, and I really like it. I have to say though, when I signed on to it, I was like, I want to make this uplifting kind of positive film, and I'm sure it'll be fun to hang out with a bunch of cars and a bunch of stunt drivers, and we'll just film some cool shit. And it ended up being almost the most difficult film I think I've done in terms of production. It was so much more complicated and mentally taxing than I would have expected to wrangle that number of cars on all of the different tracks with all of the different stunt drivers. It's much harder, I think, than it appears.
It looks kind of chaotic in the way that obviously it's filmed and there's so much demand, and like you said, with the numbers above the cars, putting yourself in there.
Mm,
But all the different shots that take place on those tracks, I honestly don't know how you'd keep track of it. It just blows my mind. I was just sitting there the whole time thinking this is like the editor's nightmare because it's chaotic. It is. It's frantic the whole way through these races, but it does make you put yourself in the driver's seat. And my heart was racing on the edge of my seat, especially when the story isn't perfect. It isn't that the first race he goes to, he wins, gets a gold medal, and gets a massive trophy, and then becomes the best driver of all time. It's
mm,
the long road, and even the big crash scene. Like I felt that crash like I've never seen. When I saw the film Super 8, and there was a train crash with
mm.
JJ Abrams, I felt that crash. Today, watching this again, I felt that crash like I was in that car, and it was quite suffocating seeing the accidents. You know?
Yeah, one person that was absolutely integral to the film was Victor Muller, the VFX supervisor.
Yeah,
And those inserts of Yun really help sell that crash. And those were done in Prague. Um, but the idea behind, I think that one of the reasons that I think that sequence feels kind of realistic is we sort of bound ourselves by certain real world parameters that we weren't allowed to step out of. And that even includes, like, for example, so the main shot is a panning shot where we pan with his car when it hits the barrier and then
yeah,
when it flips. And it looks like either a motorsports angle or a news angle. It's incredibly real world, right? There's nothing synthetic about it. And what we used to have in the edit was we had a drone shot, which we've obviously very clearly established that we're using drones, and like it's a filmmaking language in this film that the audience would have accepted because we've set it up well.
yeah.
And the drone was moving towards the car as it was careening towards us over the fence. And it was a very cool shot, but it was also synthetic. You don't in motorsports, you don't see a crash from that angle. It just doesn't happen. You
Never.
see a crash like that in Hollywood. And it was a very specific decision to remove that and to triple down on the idea of only the pan. You know, it's like kind of a decisive move to go, we're only trying to present this as realistically as possible. And so I think the simplicity of that brings a level of realism to it that makes the audience feel a little bit more in jeopardy. And then we did the internal shots that I was talking about with Victor in Prague, where we I wanted to slow time down in there and be with Jan as
Yeah.
that happens and as he's rolling. So it's a bunch of profile shots. But the reason I bring Victor up is because in the POV shots from Yun's eyes, as the car ultimately ends up upside down on the roof with the lawn, those shots are 100% CG except for the lawn.
Wow.
So they're yeah, I mean, and it, you know, we the timeline for this movie was crazy tight. So we kind of were looking at those. I'm not exaggerating. We were looking at those in gray shaded, like Phong low resolution renders 2 weeks before we delivered the film,
That's
you know?
madness.
And it's like that's how pressured it was for time, but it's also incredible how photorealistic they ended up looking in the end. So it's kind of awesome, given like what he did with the timeline that he had. But you know, we that sequence had to feel as real as we could make it feel.
And when we refer to the characters of this film, because that's what I think I wasn't expecting in this, the heart of the movie and the kind of
Mhm.
the relations of the mother and the father and the son relationship of this family, and how he's kind of the father's had success in the past and wants his son to do well, but also doesn't want to put his son at risk or at danger.
Mhm.
Um, the casting I think was crucial, and you must have been in your element when you got these incredible world famous actors and actresses that were part of this story, because I don't think you could have done it with anyone else. I think the
Mhm.
David Harbour, Orlando Bloom, Jerry Halliwell, who I wasn't expecting, these performances were unbelievable.
Yeah. Well, my I mean, David Harbour, I couldn't agree more. I mean, you know, David and Archie really were these. I was just very lucky, basically.
Yeah,
But the other person that is less mentioned that I have always wanted to work with, and I was so stoked with what he did, was Jaimin Hunsu as his dad.
unbelievable.
And yeah, and like the scene where he comes into his trailer, you know, to basically like reconcile with his son. You know, I just love that guy. I mean, I've ever since Amistad and Gladiator, you know, I mean, that was around the time I really wanted to try to get into directing, and I watched those films and I was like, I really wish I could work with that dude one day. So I do agree with you. I mean, it's like especially Archie and David though. It's like what both of them did was just really cool, you know, and they're both great to work with.
Was it because obviously Orlando Bloom's character is this kind of slightly, he would get under my skin because it was like you're too focused on the business and you're not worrying about this person as a human being. You just wanted to get the results and be seen as having this
Mm.
achievement. But just
Yeah,
a
I mean,
just a
some of
huge
that was
actor.
embellished. It was
Yeah,
embellished as well because, you know, there was this kind of drive to create conflict between him and David Harbour
yeah,
as much as possible. And I mean, I don't know Darren Cox well enough who it's based on, but I assume is probably more caring or compassion for the drivers themselves, in
yeah,
reality, probably from him. So Orlando's character was more like marketing specific. You know, it was like Nissan marketing and very hyper focused on what his objectives were. But you know, at the same time, you also you want to be very clear about which character is doing what for Jan, for Archie. And the surrogate father was David Harbour. You know, you
yeah.
can't really split that. You've got to be very clear about who it is. So he has his real father who he reconnects with, and he has the surrogate father who gives him like incredibly valuable information. And ultimately, at the end of the film, it's like it's David Harbour or Jack's win as well. You know, and it's so it was a clear choice to do that, and Orlando did really well with what he had. It was like well executed.
Was it kind of any moments on set that really challenged you? Obviously, it's a very different film to your previous work like District 9 or Chappie. It's completely different. The theme, the story,
Yeah.
the effects, everything. Were there times that you felt really challenged that you were like, I'm not sure how we're going to pull this shot off or how we're going to use the right technology to make this look right to fit with the context of the film?
It's not really that kind of challenge. It's like I was saying before, it's the logistics
Yeah,
of it's the scale of production. Like the movie in some ways is a little bit more old school in the sense that it doesn't rely on in your face VFX and giant VFX sequences. So I think if you were to look at something like superhero films of today and you compare their budget ratios, their allocations of resources inside the budget, you would see in, probably in the 70s and the 80s. I mean, when you even, yeah, I think even if you look at films that had visual effects back in the 80s, the ratio of VFX spend is probably like infinitely greater in
yeah,
today's superhero films, right? So it actually means production to some degree is a little bit more limited. And Gran Turismo was the opposite of that. It was like old school film production where it was massive, upfront, mostly in camera stuff. So and that's not to take away from VFX. I mean, there were like 1,100 VFX shots that were done. They're mostly
wow,
invisible VFX. So it's a shitload of VFX, but it still meant that we had to shoot the entire movie basically for real with cameras.
yeah.
And so it's not like there was no individual challenge where I didn't know how to do something. It was more the daily grind of just a very large and somewhat complex, almost like a stamina test, really, than anything else.
Does it make you now want to take a step back and do something a bit smaller on a lower budget that kind of feels more
Well, I I,
at
I
home or
am I am doing that actually. Like I'm doing a smaller film that I'm starting soon. I mean, it's not tiny, but it's smaller than
it's not on
Gran
the scale of
Turismo.
Gran Turismo?
No, no.
Can you tell us anything at all about this film, even if it's just the genre or
The genre is alien abduction.
oh wow.
Yeah,
And you starting
definitely,
this quite
definitely
soon?
horror-ish. Yeah, quite soon.
Oh man, you're teasing me. But then you also said you've got something, is it sci-fi in the works that you want to get quite involved or fantasy that you want to kind of delve into?
No, 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 no. The one that I was saying was the project that I sold to Columbia that
Yeah,
ended up basically turning into Gran Turismo. That film I want to shoot next year. That's a larger science fiction film that's more like that people will assume that's more like me, I think.
yeah.
Yeah.
And what about the Oat Studio stuff? Because that's some of my favorite things you've ever done, and
And
everyone we
I
talk about is
love Oates.
always wanting more of it. But it felt so real and done so well. And all I speak to is a lot of people that are getting into film, and
Mm.
everyone now is saying that's their textbook, that's their go-to because it just shows the techniques that you can do in-house in a studio, and if you do it right with the right people you can get it right. And I don't think there's any better example than Oates. It's some of the finest work I've ever seen.
Yeah, I mean, I think AI is definitely gonna technology is moving so quickly that it's hard to know what a version of that studio looks like 3 or 4 years from now.
Yeah,
People really could be very, very, very self-sufficient in quite a short number of years from now, I think. Um, but yeah, I totally love Oates. I mean, I love the structure of the studio that we had built, and I also love a lot of the pieces that we made, and the worlds that we were creating. Like Firebase is basically just insane.
it's
It's like
unbelievable. But then
clinically
everyone
insane.
everyone I see wants to see a film version of Firebase now, or a film
Yeah.
version of a full feature. Which is that something you could ever do, or is it kind of
You
done in
could.
the
I mean,
past?
Raqqa would be easier to make. I think Firebase is so philosophical and contemplative. That one may be more difficult, I think, to actually finance as an entire movie. It's maybe possible, but Raqqa is the one that I go to immediately because I love how unrelentingly dark Raka is.
It's unbelievable, dude. And I suppose a lot of people that listen to this podcast are people that are trying to get into the film industry, and because it's changing so dramatically, even since we last spoke, how everything's moved on, and that's only in
Mm.
the last couple of years, and with AI coming in, how do you kind of see the industry going the way it is at the moment? Because AI kind of seems to be a hot topic where people are against it straight away, but I feel that you've got to accept it because it's here and it's going to stay.
No, I mean absolutely. You know, like the completely incorrect approach would be to pretend it's not here.
Yeah,
I mean, it's yeah. The smarter thing to do would be to learn how to use it and stay ahead of the curve because it's not going anywhere. It's just going to become more and more part of our lives. But I think the fear with AI, it for some reason it's become a film industry discussion. Actually I do know why that is. I think the original fear with AI was that it would replace jobs that it seemed to make more sense that it would replace.
yeah,
So like automated truck drivers, automated trucks, automated cabs, things like that. And I think artists probably have this like elitism where they're like, well, it can never replace us. But it's like actually one of the first things that it did with Midjourney and ChatGPT and everything else is like it 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 actually can do artwork and it's pretty insane, like the level of and that's basically version one, so
yeah. That's
that's
the
like out of the
frightening thing.
gates, that's what it's doing.
Yeah,
Like 10 years from now, I mean, it's going to be completely indistinguishable from humans. So I think the shock is, oh, it can replace a lot of white collar jobs, like that's and people I don't think were expecting that. So but it's the wrong thing to do is to kind of try to make it illegal or turn your back on it or keep it out of the room. Like it's just never ever going to happen ever.
so is this
So
something you can see yourself, and you maybe already are, but are you trying to get involved with it to then use it as a tool for your next upcoming films?
I mean, personally, it's not as interesting to me. I mean, my bigger fear, like I'm not really worried about some sort of Terminator Skynet style
No.
outcome. I don't really think that is going to happen. But what I do think is quite likely actually to happen is a feeling for people in any job capacity, in any job, to suffer this immense level of redundancy that they've been replaced. And you could have huge swaths of the population that have been replaced by something and made redundant and kind of don't they like one part of it is just your income and your job, and that's bad enough. But another part of it is like if you really get philosophical about it, it's like what does it mean to be human?
Yeah.
Like if this can do it, then what are we? And so there is a very negative societal the way that society begins to perceive itself. I think if we go down that road, which we probably will go down, and then obviously like we'll learn to work with it, and then maybe that it'll lead to a new boom and different frontiers that we never imagined. But so in that capacity, with some sort of universal basic income that governments have to give the population so they don't like riot because they have nothing, they have no jobs. Um, in that sort of negative world, I think there'll be some level of human-made artistry that's still very interesting to humans. But it to me on a level of art of like what I'm interested in, I'm still personally more interested in self-made stuff. So like I'm not afraid of AI, and I'm not
No.
trying to keep it out of the room the way that I see a lot of people trying to do. But I'm also maybe not as interested. I'd rather have a conversation with an artist. I'd rather like,
Yeah.
like one thing that I'm obsessed with that I've never really done enough of in filming. I did a bit of it in Elysium. Is our model miniatures, right? Like Weta style Lord of the Rings model miniatures, or
Phenomenal.
basically, yeah, Star Wars, anything from like the 70s or the 80s, or Lord of the Rings. Um, it's like a huge goal of mine to like really start to get into models more. And in that scenario, yes, you can use 3D printing, but really it's extremely, extremely human generated. It's very tactile, and it's like glue and uh paints and urethanes and materials and sawdust and like, wearing eye protection because it's so physical. It's non-digital. It's very, very analog. And I'm more interested in that than I am in really interacting with AI. I'm becoming more interested in real world stuff and less interested in computers, which is kind of interesting given that I,
You've
used to
just
be
done
like,
Gran Turismo.
yeah, I don't think that, yeah, I don't think that's the reason, but yeah, but anyway, like, so I don't think anyone knows where we're going. I think we're just, we're in uncharted territory, and we've built a society that is so much smarter than we are and so much more complicated than humans are designed to sort of keep tabs on, that it's in danger of running away from us. And it's not good psychologically for humans. If you lived in the middle of like the Roman Empire or Sumeria, or like the beginning of agriculture, or even if you were Paleolithic or whatever, it was like 100 generations before you and like 50 generations ahead of you, nothing was different. This is what you did. And life was that we're biologically designed to live and function at that level. We're not biologically designed to live with a societal upheaval, in every 50 years, every 25 years, and then you just go down the scale 12.5 years, down, and I mean that's what the singularity is meant to be. It's like this
Yeah.
compression until eventually it's just information is basically doubling or squaring itself every second, and it does appear like that's the direction we're going in, but we're not really designed to deal with it. So it leads to a lot of psychological pressures for people in unpredictable ways.
I was getting really excited then when you were talking about miniatures again and figures, and I've been
Mm.
watching quite a lot of videos on Instagram and YouTube recently of Del Toro, who spends a lot of time painting figures for his fans, and he shows you the process that he's gone through, especially with his stop animation stuff. But
Hmm.
there's a lost art, I think, in practical effects. And when you look at films now, for me, one of my favorite films of all time is John Carpenter's The Thing. I watch that now, and I do not believe that's made in 1982. I still think it could be made only 10 years ago, and it
Have
looks
you ever heard the
flawless.
stories? Have you heard the stories about Rob Bottin on The Thing? Have you heard this? Do you know
No,
Rob Bottin?
I know the guy, and he's an absolute genius, and I know his
Yeah.
work, but I don't know any stories about him.
I don't know if this is true, but someone was telling me that apparently, because when he did The Thing, I think he was like 18, right?
Yeah, I know he was really
He
young, and
was like
it nearly
19 or 18.
destroyed him mentally because it was the work he
Yeah.
was doing is
Well, that
crazy.
that that's what I was gonna say. Like, I think he was like dehydrated and malnourished or something, and I think John Carpenter drove him to hospital at some point. There's some insane story, and he was basically working like 23 hours a day on like Coke and pizza for like 8 months, and like everything was his own stuff. I mean, he was making everything. He was designing
Yeah.
and manufacturing stuff, and then he just sort of like collapsed in the workshop, and then Carpenter was like, bro, you need some electrolytes or something, and was taken to hospital. But he also designed RoboCop as well. And he's a I mean, that's the kind of stuff that got me into the film industry initially. Like, I love that stuff, absolutely love it.
Does it make you want to use more of it moving forward, even though you've just come back off a huge computer generated and CGI fest? Are you now looking at wanting to return to something? I know we've talked about a new horror and we've talked about that other project, but is there is there a John Carpenter thing in you? Is there a that sort of feel?
Well, it's an interesting discussion because like the one part, what you're really asking is like, do you want to work with practical effects and practical miniatures and stuff? And the
Yeah,
answer is yes. The answer is yes. But when you say like the John Carpenter thing feel, like the vibe of that movie, right? The thing that is really interesting about that is that at the time, Carpenter was using the most cutting edge visual effects. That's what it was. It just
yeah,
didn't happen to be computers. And I think it's one of the reasons, like when you look at Prometheus and you compare it to Alien, I think one of the criticisms with Ridley is like, why doesn't Prometheus look like why doesn't it have the same feel and vibe, the analog vibe that Alien does, right? And as a younger person watching the two films, we can analyze that, right? But when you're Ridley in 1979, that is the most cutting edge version of technology. And then when you make Prometheus in 2011 or whatever, That is the most cutting edge version of technology. So his it's like his direction and his way into it is probably the same thought process. You see what I mean? It's not. It's
No,
like,
that's completely valid. Yeah.
but aesthetically, it results because there's such a large gap in time. It results in two different aesthetic visual palettes. They're two different. They're not congruent with one another. So it's a very interesting thing. So it's like Carpenter today remaking the thing, or if you could just magically have him appear today and have him make the thing, it probably involves a shit ton of VFX, unless it was the actual living version of him that was trying to re-reference the film that he made back then. So now today it means you're knowingly going retro, which
Yeah.
by the way I also think is super cool.
Yeah.
So like you know, I always shoot on film. Like I have these Super 8 cameras. Like,
That's
I mean, I
awesome.
don't, I'm in Vancouver now, but I don't really live in Vancouver, but I have these where I do live as well. And I just am obsessed with anything organic and tangible and, old school. So I haven't really put it into films yet. Even, I guess the most like that, I suppose, is District 9 because it's sort of retro VHS and
Yeah.
not Super 8, but high 8 video. So it has a shittiness about it that I
It's got that
like.
sort of grain feel about it that makes it feel like it's not a
Yeah, it's
stupidly
like
low budget
analog
film. Yeah.
video.
Yeah.
Yeah, analog video. Yeah, that was actually also one of the first movies ever to be shot on red cameras, red one.
Really?
Yeah, because of Peter Jackson, like PJ had bought I think he bought like three or four of the prototype first red cameras off the assembly lines. And he was obsessed with them, and he was like, "You should use these for District 9." And so I think we had two maybe of the first red ones on D9.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's good advice from someone who knows what he's doing.
Yeah, Jackson's really, I mean, so awesome with all of that retro stuff as well, like what Weta created with Lord of the Rings and even his own stuff like Brain Dead
I was just about
and
to say Brain Dead just
yeah, just
completely
a
chills.
very, very tactile, super analog feeling cool old school stuff.
And I suppose that's what I want. That's what I'm trying to get at. Does that interest you? I know you've dealt with it with District 9, as we've just mentioned, with some of the technology in the cameras, but that Stranger Things, that poltergeist feel, that kind of real. I know it's retro and they're using good
Oh
technology at
yeah,
the
for
time,
sure,
but
for sure.
that's the trip down
Absolutely.
memory lane and give us some nostalgia using the old school practical effects
But
again.
it's kind of like late Gen X nostalgia. You know what I mean? It's like it's specific to us. Like I speak to my daughter a lot about what's nostalgic to her. It's super interesting. I mean, going back to cars as well, and my obsession with cars. It's
Yeah,
like people have this with cars too. It's like what was the car that you were obsessed with as a kid? And it's like as you go through these generations, like two cars that I'm personally obsessed with is a Ferrari F355 and the original Honda NSX. That's
yeah,
because I was like 13 or 12 when those cars, came out, right? 14, 13, 15, somewhere in that zone. And today, all of a sudden, those are becoming collectors' cars. So like they're and it's each generation you can see it happen. So there's something kind of amazing about the concept of you if you imagine in 2040 doing digital TikTok kind of borderline Instagram filter retro, like that's nostalgic, you
yeah.
know. So it's just generation by generation. But for me, yes, Poltergeist, what Stranger Things was riffing on, anything from the 80s, it's like it would be super fun to do something in there. I actually love Grindhouse, Rodriguez and Tarantino's Grindhouse. Like I love those, and I really love Rodriguez's film Planet Terror.
That's amazing.
It's not exactly the same as what you're saying. It is different to what you're saying because it's obviously like Grindhouse, like B film, but the leaning fully into that genre and just doing it,
It felt
was
like a video
so
nasty. It found like
satisfying.
one of those ones
Yeah,
that your mates would be like,
so
"Oh,
good.
have you seen this?" And you're like,
Yeah,
"Where did you find that?" It's like
no,
under
it's
my
so
dad's
good.
bed. Like it's so good. But and that wasn't too long ago, and it worked, and everyone absolutely loved it, and
Yeah,
took them down that nostalgia trip again.
you know,
So
riffing on the video nasty term or the concept of that. One of the best things I've ever heard in my life like that is the director Panos Cosmatos lives in Vancouver, and I know him. And he one of the films that he's done that I'm obsessed with that I just love is the Black Mirror, Beyond the Black Mirror,
yeah,
Beyond the Black Rainbow. Sorry, Beyond the Black Rainbow. and his what he self-funded that movie. And the way that he described it to me was, he's like, when you when you're a kid and you're in a VHS store and you saw all of like video nasties, all of
Yeah,
these like fucked up R-rated films, and you couldn't rent them and like your parents wouldn't get them for you. He's like, Beyond the Black Rainbow is what I imagined would be on one
on
of
that
those
shelf.
tapes.
That's
Yeah.
amazing.
And like the whole movie is basically that. So it's one of the coolest descriptions for the genesis of a movie like I've ever heard
It's like
of.
the VHS you weren't allowed.
Yeah, exactly. Or
Amazing.
what he imagined might be on that tape,
I love
you
all
know.
those though. Even stuff
So
like
good.
Basket Case. Have you ever seen that? Like
Yeah.
really, that's like
Yeah.
really fucked up. And
Yeah.
those classics are just. There's a reason why they still are so beloved today.
Totally. I mean there's a bunch of them that I don't know the names of, that I just know the images, where it's like, man, that is some crazy shit.
That's not going to be your next film.
No,
Not a reimagining of
not right
Basket
now.
Case. Straight off the back of Gran Turismo.
Yeah.
So what is it looking like then? Are you going to have a couple of months off before you start doing these next film? Because you must be exhausted from Gran Turismo. Like your brain probably needs just a bit of normal life, being a dad, being a
Yeah, that would be
a
good.
family man, and just
Just chill out for a bit.
eating at the right times and sleeping at the
Yeah.
right times.
I don't know. I don't know. We'll see. I mean, I think I'm probably going to start working pretty soon.
I feel like you know that already, and you're just not allowed
Maybe.
to tell me.
I don't know. Maybe I just don't want to admit it to myself.
No. And what I always do on the podcast, and you've been asked the question, but it's always interesting for me, is the last piece of music that's played after we've done today's interview is chosen by you. So is there a song that you absolutely love that you would
Hmm.
love to play out? It can be any song in the world
Okay,
as well that you really love.
this is kind of insane, but I'm gonna go with this one because I was listening to it yesterday and I like it. I'm gonna go with Cobra Style from Robin.
Wow. I've not
Yeah.
heard a lot of Robin, but I know the big singles, but
The reason for it is because I saw Barbie and I kind of really liked Barbie.
it was
And
great fun. It was just
yeah,
it made me
I
want to go to
totally
the
liked it.
cinema again. That and Oppenheimer together was just amazing.
And there's a track in there by Charlie XCX, which when it came on in the film, I was like, this is Cobra Style from Robin. And then I had to go and find it. And it because I know it wasn't Cobra Style, it's a remix, but it was Charlie XCX kind of riffing on it. So it made me think of it. Then I listened to Cobra Style. So I'm going out with that track.
And is it just because you just loved it in the film and it made you want to listen to it, or is it just because you just loved the track?
I like all of it.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
What sort of bands do you listen to? This doesn't need to go on the podcast, but I'm curious what sort of music you listen to.
I listen to so much music. I mean, it's like music is a huge part of sort of linked to being creative for
Yeah,
me. But if I had to boil it down, it would probably be like, one of my favorite artists of all time is Gary Newman, right? I absolutely
legend. Yeah,
love Gary Newman. But anything in the kind of synth pop to uh like dark wave industrial, anything kind of in that zone, I'm extremely into. So like, I mean, there's too many to name. In a more contemporary setting, something like Pumped Up Kicks by Three Teeth would be
yeah.
like would be a good example of something that is a bit more modern version of something that I like. But yeah, I mean, I'm pretty much constantly listening to music.
Have you checked out the band? And I'm not paid to plug them or anything, but have you listened to the band Sleep Token?
No.
They're like a modern
What
day.
genre is that?
It's very much like a modern day Nine Inch Nails, but with a bit more oomph to it and a bit more angst.
Hmm. That
It's
sounds cool.
it's mind blowing, dude. They've just
Sleep Token.
Sleep Token. They've just been supported
I'll write that down.
supporting Slipknot on their world tour,
Okay.
and they've got a new album out, and it's a masterpiece. Like I'm not sure if you'll dig it straight away, but it'll get into your system, and it's powerful. It's really decent, and they're going to be the biggest thing. Like they're already there's a venue in the UK called Wembley Arena, and they sold it out in 4 minutes, 10,000
Hmm.
tickets.
Hmm.
So people know what they're doing, but they're unbelievable.
Okay.
Give them a go.
Thanks.
And I
Yeah,
think
thank you.
I think you'll dig them. I think you'll really like them. And just start with the new album. I've forgotten what it's called, but it's the latest album.
Okay, absolutely.
And let me know what you think. You might hate it, but I think you'll love it, especially with the stuff you've just been talking about today.
Yeah, no, I'm sure I'll be into it.
Take Me Back to Eden is their brand new album, but it starts with a song called Chokehold. Listen to that and tell me what you think.
Okay.
Awesome, dude. I've noticed I've got like a bit of a blue line across me now. Look at that.
Lens
There we go.
flare, yeah.
How's
You're
that?
JJ
Um,
Abram in the shot.
I appreciate you coming back on, dude. It's been good to talk to you and not talk about District 10, which you always get asked about, and every fucking story about Robocop. So it's been nice and refreshing to talk about something else.
Agreed.
I bet you're sick to death of it now.
Yeah, I am tired of talking about those movies.
Good.
Yeah.
It's been nice not to talk about it, but
Yeah.
awesome. I'll let you go and enjoy the
Thanks,
rest of
Mark.
your day. And
Okay.
thanks for coming back on, dude. And yeah, I'll drop you an email soon.
Thank you, man.